We're having 2 Russian women poets visit our experimental class that's offered in connection with the readings. These women have long, unpronounceable names, and I can't find them with me. I thought I had them, but you're all invited to come hear them read if you're free at 12:30. They'll be there for the first half of the class. They're sponsored by the Russian State Department, and I understand one of them is an editor of a very well-known magazine in Moscow, and the other one is the leading woman Russian poet. And I'm sorry we don't have any of her work available, but it might be very interesting to hear both of these women speak. February 26th, Tuesday at 12:30. Our next reading is on March 4th, and it will also be in HLL room 135. Carl Dennis, and Robert Peters are reading. Is it all changed? Our next reader is Adrianne Marcus. She's a poet and freelance writer. Her most recent book is The Chocolate Bible, which was published by Putnam's, and she's at work now on a book of recipes of regional California cooking. She has 3 books of poetry. The first one was The Moon is a Marrying Eye, which was published by Red Clay Books. The one I have here is Faced with Love, published by Copper Beech. And she has a new book coming out in about a month called Child of Earthquake Country, published by New World Press. Adrianne Marcus.
The first poem is an explanatory poem. It's what we call the autobiographical poem. Not the way I would have it, but the way it is. It's called Shabbiness. Which is the way, you're right, I see the world. Not what is planned, but what happens. Why, when all year long I dream of Glinda the Good, to arrive at my own Halloween party in a sparkling white dress, thousands of bugle beads, sequins glittering on the white tulle, why doesn't it happen that way? Instead, it is the other witch who comes, the one in black, with her straggly, impossible broom. Even in black, the effects ought to be right, ought to achieve the careful hours spent before the rehearsed mirror. I put on my black dress, the one with the marabou cuffs, and throw my black velvet cape over my shoulders. Its black, rough ostrich feathers frames my face in an expensive, stunning way, but only for a moment. What causes the feathers to drop one at a time, leaving Hansel and Gretel perplexed, wondering who has scattered this trail from place to place? What beast is molting on the dance floor? I lose it all, feather by feather, at the right place, at the wrong time. This is the way it happened, not what I planned. It is the shabbiness of a world where nothing performs as it should, nothing goes according to the way the advertisements promise, where the person I wait for will eventually show up at the wrong place, where the trains run only by approximation and never on time. My entire life spent being punctual and waiting. Hours before the plane is due to depart, I am the one who is there in line, the one convinced schedules must be kept, the one knowing how foolish she looks, how inappropriate it is to be early. If it were up to me, if I ran this world, it would be right. Timetables exact, Swiss watches all set to Greenwich Mean Time, everyone functioning at optimum capacity. Even the seasons would know when equinox came and change. All those delays, all those moments of waiting for something to happen, shabby. And when it does happen, it is the wrong way. Like walking into the bench the night before I'm to leave on vacation, my toe breaking, the vacation suddenly over. Or, if I'm lucky enough to leave, the weather cooperative until the moment I appeared will take its turn for the worse, so I can be met late by a friend who will say, "You should have been here yesterday. The weather was perfect." This is the first hurricane of the season, the first cataclysm, the worst monsoon in recorded history. Welcome. Shabby, more than shabby. To think the world has nothing better to do than to do it wrong. To know it does not matter how carefully I prepare. Nothing will stop the door from slamming, the souffle will fall, and the electricity will fail at the precise moment all the guests assemble. Only a sense of humor saves me, not graciousness. I learn to laugh at the broken toe, at the clumsiness of my own feet, at my arms that are stopped only at the moment of inevitable collision. I never even drift off into dreams the way others manage gracefully. And on a dance floor, trying to move the way the music tells me I should, into someone's arms which fold around me, I falter. It is a step, or my partner's feet. But it does not matter. I will say, "I'm sorry, excuse me," to a partner who realizes he has made a mistake by bringing me onto the dance floor and thinking he could lead me anywhere safely. It is shabby. It is impossible. The inanimate world convicts me for what I am, the variable factor, the woman given to chance, a living example of entropy. As you can see from that poem, or hear from that poem, I read a lot of books about physics. It seems to me the language of physics is very close to the language of poetry. And once in a while I can steal something from them. And so when it came along that I finally got to read about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, I stole that. It seemed to me the job of a poet was to lie, cheat, and steal with as much style as possible. And for those of you who are now about to hear me mangle Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, it has two parts. Rick can correct me if I'm wrong. The first is, if you know the speed of a moving object, you will only know approximately where it will land. You can know one of two things about an object. If you know the speed, you can only know an approximate range of where it's going to hit. And the other part is, by the nature of you being there, you alter the experiment. So there is no such thing as an objective experiment. And this poem is called Science Fiction. In the corner is a book that explains black holes and Heisenberg. Whatever the world proves, it proves by inference. Love, for instance. When Ferdinand observed Miranda, she changed the island subtly. She believed in magic. Ice will melt at such and such a point and water vaporize. This does nothing to explain phenomena, human beings, or how a heart calibrates the pain of love. Consider what velocity revenge possesses, increasing with the speed of light. Waking, discover a black hole, call it a heart, where everything is plunged, consumed into an unexpected universe. Time runs backwards, curses all our acts to their beginnings. Heisenberg, when I observe this universe, I change by small degrees. The act and the observer no longer separate. Fusion, love, which seems a plural, is only one, confused, having left its path to whirl unstable, out of orbit. It is not there, nor there. The word transient has a whole lot of definitions. The one I used in the poem is the one from physics, and I think it's explained within the poem. Transient. I know all synonyms for this, the second definition, decaying with time. Everything that I have almost held, transient. Come here, you say, holding out your hand or pride. I say, no thanks, having read your palm in the brief light before the world blinks out. Later I think, it's always been like this. The stupid dog I loved at 6, the impossible musician at 16. I'd blink and then return to absence. Now at 38, I wonder what is adequate to me. Absence is my guide, and what I love is loss. I am a silver wire over which a bias current runs, sender and receiver, the voice on the other end, behind the mirror. This is the only poem I ever wrote that I didn't have to revise 5,000 times. It's a poem called Journey's Destination. and it came pretty much complete. As such, I treasure it because I get very few of those in life. Journeys, destinations. Wherever your face is, it will turn 45 degrees north. At midnight, you will remember me. A minor shadow will cross, divide your face into thin, unequal parts. Shall I remind you that love is no longer possible? You have missed the plane, the angle of intention. All that we own is geometry, the triangle. Two sides are known, the third constructed from inference, desire. I have become as movable as paper. Te amo, ciao. In some foreign languages, love is said to exist, or the shell of it. Be content with what you do not have. Goodbye. 3,000 miles of water, maps that purport to show salvageable land unfold in your hand to be islands. Stay there. Do not return. I am the line, equator that you crossed to lose a day. It was a small loss, but you will miss it. I'd like to read some from the new book, Child of Earthquake Country, and the poems are all poems of place for the most part. And they start out at Ossabaw Island, Georgia, where I spent a month writing. And the bets were on when I left here that I would last a week before I went stark raving mad at Ossabaw, because there's no telephone, no television, no radio, and no way to communicate with the mainland, which is 12 miles away. You get mail once or twice a week, which is delivered by boat. A month there, and I had to be dragged off kicking and screaming. I didn't want to return to civilization. I was surprised to find out how little communication you really need after you get into a place that's all wilderness, that you find out a great deal about yourself and about the island. It's a semi-tropical island off the coast of Georgia, and there are 10 people on the island at any given time. And you don't see anybody else. And you don't see them very much either, now that I think about it. And the first poems are about Ossabaw, and I'd like to share some of those with you. This is called A Letter Home. The island was not what I had imagined. Beach, trees, all sand and sun ready to be walked, made into objects for poems. Arriving in the fog, all I could see at first was the shape of water. But the fog lifted as we docked, and I saw marshes and grass, a white flickering of distant birds. But then they were gone. We drove for a mile. Palm trees lined the dirt road. Beyond that, wilderness. Came through the gates to the one habitable house with the clearing around it. Another view. A place where civilization is accidental, requires constant attention. At dinner, the conversation avoids these topics. We dress as survivors might, with a sense of relief, wearing items which can be commented upon, pieces of jewelry brought from exotic vacations, what we were before we came. This permits us to remember names, to remember, at least for now, what is not with us, what we did not bring. It's another Ossabaw poem. It's called Something Which Doesn't Resemble Philosophy. Sometimes sitting in a room, sharing confidences, we tell ourselves nothing can happen twice. We presume mistakenly to construct events that tell us we've learned from the past what went wrong, then think we can somehow instruct our future, which remains inconceivable and later equally foolish and done. As one person to another, maybe it happens this way. A mutual interference, like the turning on of a single green lamp which, for one moment, holds everything there is together in a pale, necessary circle. Beyond that is the familiar darkness. It holds the future like weathered names swinging above thankfully distant and intolerable doors. We cautiously make our way toward them, thinking each decision takes us someplace new. But those places we fear, which will blind us with irreversible sight, are those we have left stumbling behind us, sharp-edged, painful and alone, are all equidistant. For now, there is only the present, a small circle of light which holds two agreeable voices, then darkness, then not. The last poem in the Asaba group is called Dear Friend, Dear Island, and it took place after I had left Asaba and had returned to, quote, civilization, unquote. And I was reading the Asaba poems, there are about 15 of them, and the conversation that's in the poem actually happened. And so the poem, I guess, is an explanation for the other poems. That's about the only way I can look at it. It's called Dear Friend, Dear Island. When you asked me afterwards how many days it really rained when I was on the island, I told you 6, out of all the time I spent and all that sun. You pointed out the darkness I described was equal in my poems to all that light. I hadn't thought of that, but you were right. Half of what I see is rain, a sky, dark thudding clouds, eventualities and storms. Those other days, unblemished, came complete. What could I hope to learn from them? Joy is private, difficult to share. The darkness makes it easier to say whatever can be said. And afterwards, there's all we never say. As if I could have stayed, as if you could have said, don't leave. What would have happened then? Dear friend, dear island, one travels just to be alone. No one expects the perfect place. I wish I'd known this then, or what I'd lose by leaving. My answer would have been the same. As I said, a lot of the poems are about places. And since I do take photographs, a lot of the poems are about the taking of photographs, or the sort of surprise when you actually see what comes out on the picture that you hadn't seen there, or you don't think you'd seen it at the place when you took it. And this is a poem that actually happened, not because of the photograph, but because I read something from Peter Matheson's book, The Snow Leopard, and the quote was so good I couldn't let it go to waste. I had to write a poem for it. This is the quote for the poem. To seek some sort of permanence for what I think I have perceived is to miss the point. I've thought about that 2 years, and I still don't understand it. But it sounds so good. To seek some sort of permanence for what I think I have perceived is to miss the point. Somehow that ought to be over the doorpost of my house. The title of the poem is 3 Photographs, The Distance You Became. It's April. I take out my photographs. Here is a view of the Jungfrau, clear, defined by the morning sun, the high reaches, blue crevasses. The snow line is distinct, November's wind, more snow to come. Another view. Only the base is visible, above a blur of white. The weather drops 4,000 feet within an hour. For 3 days it will snow, all the landscape turn one-colored white and closed. I stay inside my room, write long letters saying, it is winter here. Switzerland, this country locked inside itself. On the 4th day, the mountain reappears. It's not what I remembered. A new arrangement, formidable, apart. Then I return. On that same roll of film, one photograph is left. In this one, you are standing by your car, wearing a face you've grown into. Not the face remembered, nor the one I thought I saw, but colder, more distinct. What did my camera see that I did not? The distance. And what lies behind us in the room we've left, where making love your face grew tight inside itself. I saw the little death. Outside, my camera catches all the deaths to come. Enough of serious love poems. This is a funny one. You can laugh. This started out as a serious love poem, but it's very difficult to write a serious love poem about buffalo. I mean, the nature of buffalo is such that it demands a funny poem. And I found these notes sometime afterwards and decided that some of the lines were too good to throw away, so I tried to make it into a poem that had some true meaning to my life. Unfortunately, the poem decided otherwise, and this is what you get. It's a poem called It's Buffalo, Boise, or Boston this time. Love, making love all night. I think, this can't be Buffalo. Morning comes and calls it Buffalo. So much for fantasy. Get up, it's time to leave. At the airport, I assure you everything's all right. I board the plane alone. So much for friendly skies. My life is going forward. Why am I locked in place or else reverse? I need a sensible direction. This waiting to arrive, this wondering which airport has our names and which motel won't work. We're beginning to resemble passengers, anonymous as seats, with faces only flight crews know by heart. Instead of Buffalo or Boise, Boston, Philadelphia, why don't we meet not for an hour or a one-night stand, but something else? Say a place that has our names and where the ink can dry. I'll bring my pen. You bring your signature along. We'll sign both ways. This is a new poem called The Purposeful Traveler. As you can see, they're all about travel. And I'd like to read it mainly because I've never heard it before. I don't know how other people manage their lives, but the only two things I ever did well in life were to travel and eat. And I had to make a living out of it, so food books were natural for me. Later, I can get poems out of them, but at the time, those seemed to be the two things I could do with any degree of certainty. And this is, again, a poem that started out to be written about what vacations, good vacations, should be like. And I have a place littered with brochures of dream vacations. And poems come out of those because you look at them, and yes, you can see yourself there sitting on the deck of that ship that you're never going to be on. And this is The Purposeful Traveler. Ecuador lies 600 miles distant. Quito dreams in the high afternoon sun. We sail toward the Galapagos Islands, prevailing winds from the north, a sky that repeats the day before, blue. We learn to walk on water, to move with the ship, lifting ourselves at the wave's edge, to think only in motion. Tomorrow, the first island will come into view. We're excited by what remains unseen. Some places are already too real, Mallorca, Mykonos. We have been part of them, and now we must travel from lesser to greater Antilles, the slow current of beaches gleaming, the white hotels instant, ready. We are here, or here, in a room as unfamiliar as the one before. We discover ourselves. To sail and never return. Thousands of miles from our known hemisphere, island by island, we collect seas. Make only the necessary decisions to visit, to leave, before each becomes too familiar, leaving, always leaving, before it shrinks into place, actual, too much like home. This is a poem about California. In fact, the last 3 or 4 poems will be about California. And this is my explanation to East Coast people about what it's like in California. Since they're not going to believe it anyway, it serves as well as anything else could. I collect terrible postcards, those funny postcards, with the fur trout and the big Idaho potato on the back of a flat car, the man attacked by buzzards lying there in the desert. This is a postcard of a man standing in front of a stage holding up a 10-foot high watermelon. And it says on the bottom of the postcard, that's how we grow them in California. The man is obviously a 49er. And it's a bizarre postcard. And to justify this poem's existence, the Paris Review took the poem but wanted to change a line, and I sent them the postcard to justify the fact the line could not be changed. They took the poem the way it is and kept the postcard. A postcard from California. He's standing alongside a watermelon 10 feet high. His arms can't begin to contain it. He's grown old propping it up, but has someone come in once a month to trim off his white beard. There's a red velvet curtain behind him. It sets off the unholy green melon, his nondescript clothes, so that he is only the smallest measure of what's center stage, that erogenous melon. That's how we grow them in California, the postcard proclaims. We grow old trying to display such riches, trying to create scenery that will hold it in perspective. Big mountains, impossible trees, everything here bigger than the person. This poem is called Red, Weathering the House. And on the surface, it's a poem about redwood, I guess. And underneath, it's a poem about being furious about being locked in the house for too long. And interestingly enough, the poem didn't get written till I got away from the house. Red, Weathering the House. It is redwood. Everything is redwood. Over the years, it turns gray, silvery. They call it weathering. 18 years of rooms. In the bedroom, the walls have gone from neutral colors to a colder shade. Nothing's red in here except our voices. The children listen. They've grown tired of these fights and turn on television to divert themselves. I've learned that trick, watching nothing and pretending. 6 months of never going out except to eat. There's something red in here that smells like blood. You say I'm cold. I turn on television. We watch the news at night. There's hostility enough for both of us in that. Afterwards, I call a friend. We talk for hours. Then it's time to sleep, give in to love. It takes much longer now to make me warm. We have our fantasies. I'm yours. By morning, we don't speak again. We give politeness what it needs. 2 eggs on Sunday bacon, the long ride with the children anywhere. Redwoods. Then back home. The color bleeding, bleaching into this. A fence around me that I helped you build. This is a poem, again, I think a lot of the things I write about come out of the situations in which I either deliberately or inadvertently find myself. This is a poem called My Daughter, Myself. Nothing could have saved it. Still, I had to try. She moved her hand inside the cage until the pigeon's beak was underneath the tube and I could press a few drops in. The bird resisted, jerked clumsily out of my daughter's hand, and then its head went over to one side. It wouldn't move. Lying on its back, it opened up its eye wide and stared unblinking up into the sun. One final tremor rearranged its wings. The head went stiff. She had to get it out. My hand was much too big. We slipped its tiny body in a bag. I took the whole thing to the garbage can. I reminded her about the other birds. Go check them. Bring food and water to the other cage. They were all right. 3 had made it. Only the 4th had died. I tried to tell her that. But all that afternoon there was a sense of failure, as if I should say something else to make it right. A space unoccupied like that cage still lying in the sun. Nothing could repair that, nor reverse the death of one small bird we hardly knew. Between the moment looking down when it was still alive and the instant when it opened up its dark, unblinking eyes, I knew I was too early or too late. What could I do? Just stand there connected to the sun and feel the smallness of its shudder, the terror of my own, and turn her back to tend the other birds who were inappropriate, alive. The last 2 poems I'll be reading are the last 2 in the book. And again, they take place here, at the edge of the continent.